So, hello dear students. Today we start the course in Medical Sociology, and this is the introductory lecture. And my name is Vance Sealis, and I'm the head of this course. So let's start with the main ideas, main words. What is the word sociology? It comes from Latin word socius, which is companion, and Greek word logos, which is rational order, law, and speech, the words, language in general. And we need to focus a little bit on the meaning of the word logos because it has many layers. And the first layer is that it is the rational principle in the universe, something that orders the universe and gives its meaning. And that is the important aspect of sociology, that it tries to order something, that it tries to make sense of the social phenomena that it studies. Then the second meaning of the logos is the laws of reasoning, the laws of logical thinking, which are at the same time the criteria for scientific proof and the principles for making valid conclusions out of the premises and other empirical data that we gather. And the third meaning of logos is something like the very act of speech. I possess logos, therefore I can speak. I have a logos, a good logos. And that's the structure and the content of coherent speech or text. So that's logos in rhetoric. So the simplest definition, if we put these two words together, is sociology is the understanding of the structure and principles of human companionship. Structure is another Latin word, and it means building, and strere means building, and structure means simply that how something is put together, how something is built. Now, the broad definition of sociology would go like this. It's a branch of social science, along with philosophy, psychology, etc., anthropology too. So sociology, to make it different from all these other social sciences, defines itself as a scientific study of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. And that is the definition by American Sociological Association, quite fresh, 2022. And this is what this course actually aims to do. It aims to facilitate your sociological capacity. And of course, I understand you are medical students and you will never do sociology in a full sense of the word. You will never actually aspire to become full-time professional sociologist. Of course, you can do that. There's no problem with that, but I have there's a small chance that you're going to do that because, of course, your major thing is medicine. But during this course, please try to develop some sort of sociological thinking, because that is what I'm going to be looking forward to evaluate. And it doesn't mean that you're simply reciting the theoretical points that we're going to go through. No, it means that you acquire a certain vision, a certain way of seeing, a certain way of perceiving and making conclusions of these social events. And in today's lecture, I'm going to try to give you an understanding of what does that mean. But here you can look at William Blake's beautiful, beautiful drawing, where you can see what sociologists are doing. They're trying to measure something that's real, something that does exist. Except that here you can see this painting is actually called Newton. It's a famous physicist, but we can apply the same logic to sociology. But then we need to actually give an understanding of what are the major points of study of sociology. First of them is, of course, society itself. Now, we can broadly define society as a group of people whose members interact with each other. They reside in a definable area, and they share a culture and a language. Now, culture is another word that begs definition. So culture includes the group's shared practices, values, beliefs, norms, and artifacts. And some may say that it also includes groups' history. But, how long that history is, of course, depends on the culture we're studying. Some cultures are thousands of years old. Some cultures are quite new. They were created yesterday or a couple of decades ago, such as subcultures, hippies, punks, skaters, with all that. Now, society and culture can be studied at different levels of analysis. We can study it face to face, literally studying one person, and that would be called micro level. One person, two persons, three persons. A small scale study would always be a micro level study. Then we can study groups meaning quite large groups, several hundreds even of the individuals. We can study tribes, we can study institutions and organizations, and that would be the mid-level study. And then we can study large-scale processes, historical processes affecting entire civilizations. And they're historical because what happens to a civilization is actually the subject matter of the history. So sociology and history go very much along each other, except that sociology looks at the processes within the society and tries to focus on them, while history is looking at the large narrative and trying to interpret that in a narrative sense of why did this happen, what was before, where it all goes. Okay, now, according to Adam Podgorецki, the Polish sociologist, we have 5 functions of sociology. First of all, it is analysis that helps to give diagnosis to social problems. Now, and you can immediately sense that there's something wrong with society if we're talking about diagnosis, because diagnosis is an establishment of what kind of illness or trouble society has. And then it means that there's always the assumption that society is in trouble. And in fact, that's quite true. You can always talk about certain problems. Then prognosis. Sociology predicts the future social trends based on current behavior. The patterns that it shows and the historical data. Then there's critical evaluation. Sociology does indeed criticizes and tries to show the hidden nature of structures, institutions, norms, and it's questioning them to foster social transformation. Now, we assume that transformation is improvement, but as the history shows, that's not always necessarily the case. Then Podgorецki thinks that sociology provides tools and methods to implement social policies or interventions aimed at addressing specific issues or achieving particular goals. That's the part when I'm not completely with him, but because I'm citing his original work, I'm citing it in full. But I would beg to question this, because doing some sociology myself for about 20 years already, I would say that I have very rarely seen how sociology gets proper implementation. Mostly it is used in rhetoric, but very rarely it does indeed influence the situation. But nevertheless, sometimes it does. So it can be a tool and a method to change something in society. And then integration. Sociology promotes social cohesion. At least it tends to, by helping to understand and manage the integration of diverse groups and interests within the society, hopefully towards the more harmonious society. And in that context, we can ask, for instance, because we live in the era of social media, but does social media, in fact, improve society? And how can we truly know what improvement is in place? Or maybe it doesn't improve. And how do we actually judge what's good for society, what's bad for society, and what society? How do we define it in the first place? So we have to remind ourselves that theorizing about good and bad societies, there's always a danger of falling into an ideological trap. That is, when we explain society, we already create an ideology being some sort of simplified model of the world that does help us to understand or make sense of social phenomena. And it can be theoretical ideology, or it can be purely political ideology. And we know that communism, Nazism, and capitalism are all ideologies. and we know how dangerous they can be. And we know that also wokeism is an ideology, and realpolitik is an ideology. We're going to get to those a bit later. Um, so, and just to give an example of how sociological argument is presented, I'm referring to the work of Slavoj Žižek. And Slavoj is a famous Slovenian sociologist who has done quite a lot. He's written lots of books. This is one of his latest. I think it's 2023 or 2022. And he talks about ethical degradation of the modern West. He's actually one of those whistleblowers who's trying to show how bad things actually are. He's trying to diagnose this society, and he says that we might be in the situation of the Civil War, but it's a cultural war. That cultural war does not bring actual change. Society is in crisis, and it's at war with itself. There are factions that are fighting against each other. And we saw it starting already from the election of Donald Trump, but then it continued into the COVID period, and now it's a split between different factions supporting different political groups regarding certain wars that happen: war in Ukraine, war in Israel, war in Syria. There's wars happening. And Žižek talks about factions such as obscene new populism. He talks about obscenity of it precisely because this new populism is not shy from using quite coarse language, from occasional swearing, and therefore it could be defined as vulgar and violent populism. And its characteristic would be realpolitik, that is, acting without any ideology or moral principles. And it's just doing what's good for me in the current situation, depending on the circumstance. Then he talks about right-wing religious neoconservatives who advocate for a return to old Orthodox Christian traditions, the so-called Christian revolts. And he pictures that as he says that the revolution has now migrated completely from what used to be the realm of leftist thought. They talked about revolution. Now it is a right-wing thing to make a revolution. And that if he's surprised by that, how the idea of revolution has traveled through the whole political spectrum. So he says it's no wonder that radical left and radical right actually start to seem very much alike. They very much want to revolutionize society towards this or that extent. And then he talks about left-wing wokeism and cancel culture, which is a new kind of woke authoritarianism, and what that is. It started from the subjective sense of justice that has become now a weapon in the culture wars. So the sense of justice is no longer related to an actual fighting for anybody's justice, but it has become a weapon how to bring down your opponents. And that is how marginal minorities that used to occupy a very tiny percentage of political spectrum, now get amplified by social media and seemingly take over the whole social discussion. And in their fight for recognition, there's a suspicion that they have long abandoned this idea of justice or injustice. They're just using the momentum to establish their authority. They talk about how everyone must show enough diversity and plasticity to avoid offending someone, or if the offense happens, there's a danger of getting canceled. But there's no criteria, no classification, only self-designation that people identify as something. And there's everyone's feelings. That is, you may feel offended by the standards that are only understandable to yourself. Nobody else really knows those standards because they're very subjective and they're very unpredictable. And in fact, they're very often based on shocking ignorance of the situation. So people get offended of the things that they don't even know the history of or the meaning of. It just seems offensive to them because they currently feel like they want to get offended. And that's why it becomes impossible not to offend someone if you say or do anything publicly. And Žižek writes following: the woke stance provides the supreme case of how permissiveness turns over into universal prohibition. So the logic of it was that we permit people to do whatever they want, to be whoever they want. However, in that permissiveness, we prohibit everything that doesn't fit into those very weird, sometimes very specific descriptions, specific though, but completely murky, completely unclear. So we never know if and when some of us will be canceled for our acts or words. Criteria are always murky. Žižek recognizes the signs of ethical degradation further. He talks about post-truth. And he's wondering why it is becoming more and more difficult to distinguish truth from lies. And not only in politics and the media, but also in the other spheres of life. That is, if it only would be media, we would say, okay, it always has been the case that media is politically inclined. You know, certain media represent certain political positions. But now we're not sure about scientists anymore. We're not sure about anybody anymore. And with the advances of the artificial intelligence and deep fake, you know, a lot of things can just be simply faked. So here we are. We have lost this idea of truth. But even if we have this, even if we have the truthful media who are actually reporting what's out there, Žižek thinks that it's no longer enough to tell the truth. Simply informing people will not make a difference. One has to tell truth in a way that mobilizes people to act on it. And there is certain agreement on this. I'd say he's right about this, that simply informing is no longer enough. That kind of coincides with that woke agenda that, again, just being on the media is not enough. You have to incite a movement. You have to mobilize people to follow you. And then he also talks about perverted normality of war. He's wondering, how has the war in Ukraine and elsewhere become a daily norm? We have gotten used to it. It was a shock at first, but now we're used to it. We hear the news and we're not bothered anymore. And how can Russia's economic exchange with the West go on as normal? Of course it can. The sanctions are actually tackling it. But in the beginning, it was the issue that Russia was trying to present this as the case. You know, yeah, we might be at war, but, you know, why wouldn't we provide you with the gas and oil that you need so, and thus pay us the good money, which we then invest into rockets and other ammunition which we fire at you. And in the end, will Russia, that is now a victim of Putin's fascist regime, will it ever be a normal country again? What has happened to Russia is very much like what has happened to Germany in the Second World War. It has become this rogue country. It has become a country that is no longer civilized. Now it returns to civilization. And what is civilization in that sense? You see, all of those questions are important. And then by the end of the book, he comes to certain fundamental principles that he proposes to change. And first of all, it's the radical change of ideas about the political process, because he feels we're increasingly influenced by social media algorithms. And the recent news of Mark Zuckerberg actually going on and saying that he was indeed censoring the content of Facebook in order to support Biden's agenda, his actual confession, confirms this idea. So once again, the question of truth and the question of censorship and who does that. But then Žižek thinks that parliamentary democracy has also failed, and that it is time for some sort of objective social democracy, which would also probably mean this move to post-capitalism where the demands of citizens are actually considered. When he talks about demands, he talks about accessible education, accessible healthcare, you know, all the socialist goods. And then he talks about performing civic mobilization. And here I quote him literally because I think it's important that we use here his words. I think these are not my words. This is a quote from a book. That we will have to violate not only the usual market rules, but also the established rules of democracy, enforcing measures and limiting freedoms without democratic approval. And that is his deep disillusionment in parliamentary democracy, which is actually has become more like a ritual of democracy instead of real democracy, where people go and vote, but that vote has It doesn't have that much influence on the situation. So democracy has somehow exhausted its own resources. It needs to be reinvented or changed in some radical way. And he proposes this objective social democracy. You want to read upon, of course, you can pick up the book and try to understand what he means by this. And he himself is a Marxist thinker, so obviously you see where it all comes from. There's a talk of revolution, there's a talk against capitalism, and so on and so on. But what's new here is this idea that democracy has failed. And I think that is one of the big points. And on the other hand, we may say, when did not democracy fail? Maybe democracy constantly is in the state of crisis. Maybe we could say that being in crisis is part of having democracy. But that is, again, a speculation. Now, his position is that the world as we know has ended already, that we're living in this apocalyptic situation when the world as it used to be before COVID, before war in Ukraine, it is gone. We've lost it without any capacity to recover. However, in this escalating crisis, which is the threat of the world war, the ecological breakdown, the social chaos, Žižek sees a moment in which incredible things can happen. There's new opportunities, new possibilities. So his book is not this pessimistic, oh my God, it's all bad, we're all going to die. But it's the call to mobilization. It's that civic mobilization that he's talking about. Because, and this is the last sentence of the book, the greatest risk today is doing nothing and allowing history to follow its course. And here you can see the man himself. He is often called a philosophical rock star from Slovenia. Now, before we go on, and before you start to think, oh my God, he's quoting Slavoj Žižek, and Žižek is a radical, obviously, I need to stop here a little bit and introduce what I've been preparing to with the story of Žižek and his book, which is the explanation that sociology is done in the form of an argument. That when we hear Žižek, we don't have to take him, his description of the world is an argument. He puts forth that argument, and we may critically examine it. We don't have to accept it without a question. And as Graham Crowe, who wrote the book, says that sociological argument is something one learns by doing. And I very much hope that you as students in the classes that are going to follow will be doing exactly that. You will be developing your own sociological argument. And you will find what's necessary to support it, because there's always a danger to degenerate it in meaningless rhetoric. And that is a criticism we can address to Žižek. We may say, okay, Slavoj, you've made your point, but what data do you have to support your ideas? And of course, he does provide that data in the book, but a lot of it is intellectual speculation. And that is something that we have to be very careful about, because, we have difficulties on establishing the actual truth value of it. Now, how to make a good sociological argument? I'm just going through the points in Graham's book, Graham Crowe's book. So the first one is that we recognize, understand various types of arguments. We have empirical argument, appeal to the empirical data, and Žižek has not much of that, but then we have theoretical data, and he has a lot of that, and we have normative arguments, and he has a lot of that. So he's strong on theoretical and normative side of things, so how things should be, and criticizing the social norms. And that's why he's interesting. That's why he's valid. But then we should consider and respond also to counter arguments. We may think of what people may say against what we're trying to prove. And that is how we demonstrate a thorough understanding of the topic. Then we have to discuss ethical implications of the arguments. We should be aware of the moral aspects of what we say. And that's why I put books in this slide. The one book says it's surrounded by idiots, and the other one, The Wisdom of the Crowds, by two different authors. And one says that people around us are idiots, and there are 4 types of human behavior. Why do we consider them idiots? And then why people in large masses, and that's a really interesting phenomenon, that decisions people make as a group are very much to the point and very precise. And that those phenomena of how we act as a collective are, of course, very interesting phenomena to study. Okay, moving on. Third point, Arguments are grounded in solid data. They're supported by empirical evidence. That doesn't need much explanation, of course. That's self-evident. Then arguments are shaped by theoretical perspectives. Understanding the theory is crucial for engaging with and evaluating the arguments. And that's really true, because every theory tries to give a sensible explanation of the world. And here we see at the side two books. One is by Arthur W. Frank, and we're going to talk about him more when we're going to talk about body illness and illness experience. And then we have also a history of cosmetic surgery, which is very interesting book by Elizabeth Haken. Suggest you to read it because it does explain how did we arrive to this health part of healthcare that talks about beauty and as jokingly we may ask, is ugliness a disease then? If we have a branch of medicine concerned with beauty, then beauty would be the health and ugliness would be disease. But that then according to whom, who's the one to judge, and et cetera, et cetera. And important for sociology is ability to summarize. In fact, that's what also I expect you to do, to give a precise but short summary of important theories or important researches that you want to use to support your argument. 5, arguments evolve over time as new evidence and new perspectives emerge. So once society changes, the previous brilliant ideas, brilliant explanations may not matter anymore. So we have to be careful about making timeless conclusions about things. Following, intellectual craftsmanship. We have to state the essence and the novelty of the views. We have to immediately state why what we say is new and important, not just the regurgitation of the previously said things. And here you see various examples of book titles that are describing society. One of them is American Healthcare Paradox, Why Spending More is Getting Us Less. You see that clearly there's a paradox. We spend more, but we get less. And this is for Americans. Or you have this metaphorical idea here, suicide of the West, how the rebirth of tribalism, populism, nationalism, identity politics is destroying American democracy. European democracy, by the way, as well. So suicide of the West, a very colorful language. Or why social media is ruining our life. So that's a good question. And then there's the Adonis complex, how to identify, treat, and prevent body obsession in men and boys. What's interesting about that is that we usually assume that women are obsessed about their bodies, that women are focused on the hair, the nails, everything, you know, the cosmetic beauty and et cetera, et cetera. But it turns out that men have equally important problems to solve in 21st century. So there's this idea of the fit man, the muscular man, the man whose muscles are very pronounced and so on and so on, and the whole idea of bodybuilding and so on and so on. So yeah, so the complex of the beauty according to man. So you see the sociologists are looking for interesting stuff to talk about, for interesting things that, you know, you do not, if we are getting tired of talking about problems with feminine beauty industry, then let's talk about masculine beauty industry and beauty standards of the masculine body. Then rhetorical style. Effective communication is really a key how sociological arguments are received. And reasoning should be easy to follow, avoiding too dense or grammatically complex things or too imprecise language. And finding a good metaphor, finding a paradox. And most often, indeed, sociology talks about society as a certain organism, and the problems would be then identified as diseases or plagues, so, et cetera, et cetera. So, to conclude, sociology teaches us to rediscover the intellectual pleasure of actually learning new things. And this is, I predict that, make an educated guess, that this is going to be the future of humanity, that because of the arrival of artificial intelligence, we're going to pay much more attention to the intellectual pleasures that we can provide for ourselves. And here you see several other examples of very interesting writing, because again, there's this wonderful book by Michiko Kakutani, The Death of Truth. This is a book devoted to political discussions about the post-truth. Then Timothy Snyder, the famous historian, The Road to Unfreedom. He talks about how Russian, European, and American societies are actually losing the grip on freedom. That used not to be an issue several decades ago, but these days, with the newest trends in society, we're kind of losing this idea of freedom. Then fantastic thing about women who buy sex, converging sexualities. That is because we usually assume that, in the sex working trade, the main customers are men who are buying sex from women. But here we have women who buy sex, and so on and so on. So, and then just for the beauty of the title, Lost in Thoughts, Zena Hitt's book with the smaller title, The Hidden Pleasures of Intellectual Life. So I hope you get to that as well. When we study the sociological materials, you get to enjoy the way how things are argued, how the world is getting explained. And of course, we should challenge the internal censorships with radical criticism, and we need to re-examine everything we know about the culture and civilization. That's what sociology does. And in that sense, it's kind of doing the same job as philosophy does, this critical evaluation and critical thinking about it. Now, let's exercise a little bit now, and this is an exercise, of course, which you just have to simply follow. But let's ask, so, okay, so we have definitions of the main terms, but how about the theories? Isn't that true that every theory proposes its own view on how the world is organized and how the world should look? And that's why I tried to make, there's, of course, infinitely more of those big important theories. But I've just picked 9 theorists who would be sharing their definitions of society. Of course, again, these are not the original definitions. For the sake of brevity, I've summarized them. But please follow how different theories define the same thing differently and why it matters. And of course, each of these theories, as the metaphor of Game of Thrones suggests, is fighting for the dominance. Every theory wants to be the theory, the main theory we accept as the best. Let's start with the father of sociology, Auguste Comte, and he says that society is a collective social organism where individuals are functioning through social institutions that maintain social order. So it's an organism where individuals function through institutions. Karl Marx, the conflict theory, he talks about economic relations, money relations that are shaped by conflicts between the classes. And those conflicts are about the control of the resources. And the 2 main classes that we're talking about are capitalists or employers and the people, the employees. And that rhetoric is still used up to today for both lefts and for rights of the political spectrum. Third is Emile Durkheim. And he says society is a set of social facts and collective consciousness that exists independently of individuals, shaping their behavior through norms and values. So here he talks about the culture that creates some kind of collective consciousness that then influences individuals, who then produce certain social actions, social facts. And he has a beautiful theory about what is social fact. A social fact is something that we all agree to call a fact. And that's why we have these discussions these days about the facts and the alternative facts. Because if we disagree about what we will call facts as society, and not just the physical facts, we're talking about social facts. For instance, when we discuss elections, was it a fair election? If we agree it was fair, by that agreement, the election becomes fair. Because we agreed that this is a fact now, we will accept election as being fair. If we disagree, then it's not fair. And now what post-truth has put on a table is that we can disagree about the most fundamental things in society. But when we do so, what happens is the social chaos. We start having not a single society, we start having social bubbles, and we start having cultural wars, civil wars perhaps. That's the Žižek's theory, that because of this disagreement on the basic idea about what the facts are, we are having civil wars. And those wars are not just about the facts, they're also about evaluations, because remember what the woke culture does. It talks about evaluating things. Now, no longer it's about the facts, but it's about how I react on what the facts are. Am I offended or not? And of course, a lot of people are offended by facts, but it has always been the case. Max Weber, Society is a complex structure of social relationships driven by individual actions and meanings. So the individual here becomes the center of attention because Max Weber actually believed that our choices and our personalities take precedence over the social structure, that we're kind of stronger than that. But they are also influenced by social authority and rationalization. Herbert Spencer, society evolves from simple to more complex structures. You see here, the idea of evolution is getting introduced, that society gets more and more complex, and this is true. We may say that actually the reason why we have such weird social life these days is because of the complexity of society, is that no longer we are that primitive society where basically your physical force would be the matter of establishing your social hierarchy. No, now there are other forces at play. Authority, economic forces, and so on and so on. But okay, societies involve and various parts work together to maintain social stability. So you see here is the change, the evolution, but it is important to maintain stability. While for Marx, you'd see that stability is really not the point here. You may have a revolution, that's the highest form of instability, in revolutions and wars. But that's how the society changes, through the radical process of conflict. Talcott Parsons. Society is a complex system of interrelated structures, institutions, that work to fulfill its functional needs, ensuring stability and sustainability. Of course, we know that Talcott Parsons is, his theory is called structural functionalism. So of course, there are structures, and of course, they're functioning and fulfilling the needs of society. And that is it, that we have structures to maintain stability by fulfilling the functions. Then Robert Merton, society is a structure of interconnected roles and functions where institutions work to maintain social order, but can also produce unanticipated dysfunctions. So now Merton says that yes, we're interconnected, we're functioning, there's order, stability, but it has a possibility to dysfunction. Now, the next one is the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, who says society is a field of power relations structured by capital and habitus. Now, power relations means that it is somewhat conflicting. Here we hear the Marxist note. But then capital and habitus are different because capital means resources. Capital means economic, cultural, social resources that we acquire. Now, habitus is an interesting phenomenon. This is Bourdieu's own invention. This is his theoretical contribution to the body of sociology, because habitus is social patterns. Now, what is social pattern? It might be perhaps easier to explain it with a fashion. How do you know that someone likes punk rock? Because they dress like punks. So dressing like punks would be the certain habitus. Now, if you want to belong to the punk rock, if you want to belong to that subculture and movement, then you dress accordingly. And because you want to belong to that, you reproduce the very look it has. And so the paradox of counterculture is that at first it is completely at odds with the general mainstream public. But then when it separates itself, it becomes even more conservative than the actual mainstream, because mainstream may have different variations. Subcultures are very, very conservative about themselves. They have very limited variation. They have very strict set of rules because they are based on difference. And that difference is actually narrower than anything you would call mainstream. So to maintain that narrow, very specifically defined culture, you actually become super conservative. And there you go. There you have this endless discussion. Who is a true punk? Who isn't? How do we know? And then we have posers who only dress like punks, but then do not share the philosophy of DIY and anti-establishment and aggressive music and living on the grid of society and so on and so on. And then you have straight edge punks who don't use any substances. And then you have punks and drug addicts who say that, yeah, of course, it's this overindulgence. And my addiction is my protest against the uniformity and seemingly normal idea of society. And then there's Anthony Giddens. Society is a set of constantly reproduced social practices. So here you see the habitus influence that can also be transformed through the duality of structure and agency. we're going to talk about the duality of structure and agency towards the end of the lecture, because it's going to end with the discussion of Giddens' structuration theory. So his definition is this: we have the habitus, we have the reproduce social practices, but they also can be transformed because of the structure and agency relationship, where individuals and social structures are mutually constitutive. So they make each other, they create each other. Individuals are shaped by culture, by structure, and the structure and culture are shaped by individuals. So there's this mutual relationship. And these are 9 perspectives. So Comte, Marx, Durkheim, Weber, Spencer, Parsons, Merton, Bourdieu, and Giddens. 9 different theorists having very different, but also somewhat similar approaches to society. A lot of them define society as sort of organism. A lot of them talk about interrelated structures. A lot of them talk about sustainability and stability. A lot of them talk about change and the ways society has to change. So while different, these definitions kind of cover the same thing. Now, let's talk about sociological perception and imagination. What is sociological perspective that I mentioned earlier? It is the capacity to perceive the social aspects of human behavior. It is the ability to shift from the individualistic view of human behavior to the social point of view. It is that shift that is necessary to acquire during this course for you as a student. And that's how it's going to enrich your medical practice, your medical profession, by also seeing the sociological meaning of everything. Now, this ability to shift takes us from the individualistic point of view of human behavior to the social point. And it emphasizes how human behavior and experience is shaped by the groups, organizations, and institutions into which people belong. Sociological imagination now is part of that perspective, because that's the type of the insight offered by sociology, which is connecting the lives of individuals to a broader social context, to its history and future. And that connection to the broader context is also very important. So we see the detail, we see the person, we see the personality, but we also see the big picture. And that shift between the big picture and the small picture, micro level, macro level, is also important for us. Now, we need to talk about what are the main social determinants of our behavior. So what is that broader social context? First of all, they're social forces. They're typical basic drives and motives which lead to the fundamental types of association and group relation. Association between the people, of course, between the individuals. So they're social forces that bring people together. Why does that happen? And of course, they're social forces that bring people apart. Then there are those habituses, or social patterns, forms and models of social actions that are repeated and have some probability of recurring again. People learn from the culture, and people acquire certain culturally shaped identities. And identities that are shaped this way are actually consisting of the models, those habituses, those patterns. So we study them. And there are social determinants like predefined conditions of daily life in which people grow, live, and work. Those are the daily conditions that we actually rarely notice as important. We kind of are used to them as we're used to breathing air, so we don't see air as a gas, that we're surrounded by this transparent gas. And those are political and economic systems, social policies, and social norms. And in that context, we can ask, why, for instance, has obesity become a problem? Now, is it a problem? And is it in every region of the world? Is that a problem? Or is that a typical problem, first and second world countries where they have abundance of the food, so they can eat more than they actually need to? And there's a whole market of junk food, and there's a whole industry that tries to supply to our sugar addiction with soft drinks and chocolates and whatnot. So why is obesity a problem? Because it's a fairly recent problem. Only in the last, say, 50 years, we have actually starting to see obesity becoming a social epidemic. And it's spreading. And now when I use the word social epidemic, of course, I need to explain what do I mean by epidemic, right? I'm not going to do that. We're going to have a whole time for the other lectures, but just to give you an introduction into what it is. Now, sociological perspective consists of the following elements, and those would be also in a certain sense, criteria for the evaluation of your performance throughout this course. The first of all, your ability to observe the social life, the ongoing processes in society, identifying the key events and the actors. Now, what is a social event? It's an interaction between two or more of the social actors. And when there are key events, that those events, interactions between two or more people, affect everybody else. Well, maybe not everybody, just the people close to them. But again, there's a scale of events. And then there's social actor, person or entity who plays a role in social interactions, whose actions are evaluated by themselves and the others. So actor is someone who can do something that then gets evaluation from themselves and the others in terms of success, whether it's good or bad, etc., etc. Now, second point, identifying the particular causes and outcomes of social events. What's going to happen because of this? What's going to happen next? Then, 3, identifying relevant characteristics of the social actors. We have to describe them. We have to give them their social profile. And those are differences and similarities between the individuals, groups, organizations, institutions participating in social life. Then we go identifying the patterns and models of social relationships. And finally, we are taking a look at the general trends and changes in society. So we combine constantly the attention to individual events and how they blend in, how they form a trend, who participates in them, who are the actors, what are the differences, what are the similarities, because this allows us to group people in certain social groups according to their interests, to their needs, to their values, to their goals. We can group people in many, many ways. And once again, we may ask, so how about the curious phenomena of children smoking? Here on the left, you see, I think it's from the Germany. It's the beginning of the century. It says at least on the little writing under the picture that this comes from Bundesarchiv, and it's about June and July of 1941. So you see war children who are smoking cigarettes. And you see the same picture in modern day Indonesia, where you have 85 of adolescents exposed to tobacco and 19.6 of adolescents smoking. And I'm pointing this out because it came to my attention when I saw a news report about how child smoking is a problem in Indonesia. And here's the source of that data. It comes from the study that has been published in January 2024. And it talks about profiles of adolescent smoking behaviors in rural districts of Indonesia. And it relates that to COVID-19 pandemic. And it talks about how many participants and so on. So this is sociology down here. This is exactly the sociology of medicine that is done here. This is one of the examples. Now, zooming back, we can ask more conceptual kind of questions. So a basic premise is that health is a central part of human experience. We cannot talk about sociology if we don't talk about sociology of health. Health is a very important aspect. But we need to make sense of whether health is a value to preserve. As many people say, we even have a toast, you know, to your health, yeah, salud, salud, to your health, of course. Gesundheit, we say after someone sneezes. So is it a value or is it a resource that we can spend and renew? And if that's the case, because you see, these are very different attitudes towards health. If something is a value, we try to preserve it. But if something is a resource, we try to acquire it, we try to spend it to achieve other goals, other values. And that does explain quite a lot about human behavior. And then we can also ask, is our environment, both real and virtual, facilitating our healthy growth? Or is it making us sick and damaged? Because this is the essence of sociological thinking, is that not only individuals are responsible for their outcomes in terms of health and behavior, but also the environment, the social environment, social norms and cultures, and the facilities available in a given society. So we can ask the following questions. Is healthcare system meant to be a repair shop for individuals living recklessly? And you can intuitively feel that probably not. But then, does healthcare have to be free for everyone? Can healthcare be organized by a free market? Again, big questions. So we have Sweden, where it is more or less free for everyone, but then we have United States, where it's a free market enterprise, and if you don't have the money, you don't have the healthcare. At least the access to proper healthcare is severely impaired for you if you are a U.S. citizen with no money. So now we have to discuss the medical sociology proper. And as you can see here, this is the cover of a book by Monaghan and Jonathan Gabe, and it's called Medical Sociology, the Key Concepts. And you can, of course, get that book if you feel like it. We will not be using it in direct sense, but if you want to just to consult yourself on the subject matter proper of the medical sociology, this is a good book to use. There's plenty, and we're going to be talking about plenty more books, so of course this is not the only one, but it's just one of those. And I think you can find it in RSU library, either the third edition or the second edition, one of the early ones. They're all good. You can all use them. So now, medical sociology is a subfield of sociology, which applies the theories and conceptualizations as well as methodologies of sociology to the phenomena related to human health and disease. Now, this definition comes from Coupleton and Weiss, one of the textbooks I was using to compose the list of readings for the course. So probably you can find it over there. Another alternative definition: medical sociology is the study of healthcare as it is institutionalized in society, and of health or illness and its relationship to social factors. So there's the same thing expressed again in two different ways. Either a definition works. You may choose which one you like best. Now, a bit about the literature. You see here you have Medical Sociology, the Blackwell Companion to, edited by William Cockerham. You have Cockerham's book, Sociological Theories of Health and Illness. You have Sociology of Health, Healing and Illness by Coupleton and Weiss. You have Medical Sociology again by Cockerham. Just William Cockerham is one of the leading medical sociologists of our day. So, of course, he publishes in volumes and volumes. But he is one of those who has actually done studies on Eastern Europe in terms of health behaviors. We're going to talk about him when we're going to talk about health lifestyles, because that's what I wrote my PhD dissertation about. So I was reading extensively what he has written, what he has done, and it's very interesting. And we have Wiley Blackwell Encyclopedia of Health, Illness, Behavior, and Society, and you can get that. There's, I think, 6 volumes of it. You can have Applied Sociology of Health and Illness, and you can have, and we're going to be using Stephen Barkin's book, Health, Illness, and Society, and so on. So these are books that this course is generally based upon, but of course there's a whole library of other books. So of course you can use these or others that you find more suited to your purposes. Now, let's focus on what is medical sociology studying exactly. And it's not just medicine that it's studying. There's health as one of the basic notions of the medical sociology. And it is the positive sense of social, psychological, and emotional wellness expressed by the term health. And these days, we're going to have the whole lecture on the definitions of health and illness. So, of course, we're going to discuss this. But for the brevity of the approach, this is the one. And these days, we have spiritual dimension also included in the definition of health. So it's not just biopsychosocial definition, but biopsychosocial spiritual definition. And here you have on the side the explanation of how these are interrelated and how they create this idea in regard to mental health. So mental health is, you see here. We have a separate lecture on mental health as well. Then disease and illness as an interference with health and wellness. And then we have healing, the personal and institutional responses to perceived disease and illness. So we have illness behavior, sickness behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we cannot attribute poor health solely to the failing bodies and the bad decisions. And as an example here, on the side, you see pictures from the United States, the city of Philadelphia. And as you know, so Philadelphia has one of the biggest and completely disastrous drug-addicted neighborhoods in the world. You have the whole streets that are filled with drug addicts who look approximately like this. They live on the streets, they use, they steal, there's all kinds of horrors going on. And in the same time, in the very same city, you have people participating in marathons and winning them. As you can see here, here's a happy winner of the Philadelphia Marathon. So why is it the case that the same environment produces two very different outcomes? One is the presumably healthy lifestyle. Of course, you may argue to what extent running marathons is healthy for you. Does it not ruin your joints? Or does it not have different health hazards on its own? Of course it does. And that's why, again, I invite you to be critical. But just this contradiction brings out so much to talk about, so much, because in certain terms, these bodies, these people, they look to a certain extent very much alike, because drug addicts tend to be rather slim, and so do the marathon runners. And to a certain extent, there's that parallelism that is completely opposite to each other. So a lot of interesting, exciting ideas to think about. Yeah, and by understanding health and illness, we also understand how society works. And in that context here, there's this multi-level approach that takes account cultural values and social responses to this, how individuals maintain, enhance, and restore health or cope with illness and disability, people's attitudes and beliefs about mental health and disease, medical occupations and professions such as nurses and doctors, which is somewhat missing from the slide, nurses, doctors, the other staff that is getting involved, perhaps lawyers these days, hospital managers, all of these, how are they interrelated? Organization, financing, delivery of medical services, theories relating to the distribution of diseases among various population groups, medicine as a social institution and its relationship to other social institutions, the role of social factors in the etiology of disease, especially functional and emotional related, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Plethora of things to talk about. Now, let's spend some time talking about agency and structure debate. And the joke here is that we see Agent 007, and of course, first we hear the word agency, and agent, we think about 007 because that's the most famous agent in the culture. But in sociology, agency means something, well, not quite different, but I mean, this is an agent par excellence. This is someone who has quite a lot of freedom and, as they say, even license to kill. Now, we don't. What do we have instead? What we have instead is the central sociological question that has been discussed since the beginning of the discipline. So how should we understand this agency structure relationship? Or in other words, to form it as a question, to what extent are individuals free to act independently? And to what extent their actions are determined by the social structures that they inhabit? What are the fashion choices, in other words? Are we just conforming to the social structures that require us to dress a certain way? So there you see a lady that is dressed very posh and so on, and she's wearing brands, and she's flashing those brands. She wants the brands to be seen because that's important. That's the social image she's projecting. And now, if you'd ask her, she may say that, of course, this clothing is expressing my personality as my individual choice. But if you understand, she's probably following one of those fashion trends that is actually defining and directing her actions. So in that sense, she may be simply conforming to what is norm. But that guy up there, he's wearing the rock band t-shirt, he's having leather pants or what seems like leather pants, I don't know. And he seems to be this rebel type. But, as we already established as well, he's also conforming to the idea of what we assume a rebel type would wear. So to what extent these are free choices expressing the personality and to what extent these are just ideas of conformity is what agency structure debate is all about. What happens? Do we define the look or does the look define us? Interesting, isn't it? So here is the definition of agency. That's the power of individual to shape their own lives, despite the constraints imposed by social structures. Now, We can ask, how can agency be increased or decreased? Can we have more agency, less agency? What are the types of agency? The primary type of agency is in the family, the secondary, the organization, and et cetera, et cetera. And how can a person possess agency over their health decisions? Because when they happen to be in a hospital setting, for instance, their decisions in many cases are made by or assisted by medical professionals. So to what extent do people indeed have free and informed choices? That's a big question. Now, social structures always act as constraints. And so individuals always put into that network of the rules and norms that are created to maintain order and stability in society. And we'll talk about sociological theories, but one of the questions is, how does sociological theory explain change in society? Because if it would be true that the structures are stable and they're created for stability, then those very structures that are created for stability would prevent social change from happening because it has to reproduce the order again and again and again and again. And then we call it tradition. We say tradition is there to reproduce the order and stability, the clarity of social relationships. True, but we have to remember all the traditions have been created, so somebody thought it up. And societies never stay the same. They change because of the technology, because of the advancements in culture and etc. And 100 years ago, it was a very different society. Very few women were part of the medical education, but now they are part of. Actually, majority of people studying medicine are female. So you see how much has changed. Now, so how can society change? Because of this duality of agency and structure. And duality simply means that social structures limit and direct the individual behavior, but the very same social structures are also a result of that behavior. So here we have, now you understand why it has been an ongoing debate, because it's a debate about who was the first, chicken or the egg. And we understand that egg comes from chicken, but chicken itself comes from the egg. So who was the first, the structures or the agents? Who did the first thing? And we have this debate expressed here as a picture. You see here, you can use this also for your understanding. A picture is pretty self-explicable. But you see here the dynamic interaction, that there's this human agency that does define social structures. Those structures offer certain resources, but also certain rules. And the outcome is this either reproduction of what is there because it's good, because it's accepted, or the transformation of such practices. Of course, that transformation can go up and can go down. It can be development and can be degradation, can be social decline. So it goes both ways. And the main theorist for us is Anthony Giddens. He's a British theorist. He's still alive. And he created the structuration theory. And that theory does polemize this. It's the central aspect of the theory. So what he goes on, he says, okay, well, let's take agents. Now, agents are defined by reflexivity and capability. Agent's capability is simply capacity to make a difference. An agency concerns events of which an individual could, at any phase in given sequence of conduct, have acted differently. So he could have made a choice to do this or a choice to do that. And that capacity to make difference combined with a choice is what makes this agent an agent. Reflexivity is defined by capacity or the ability of people to know, understand, and to critically reflect on their place and condition in the social world. So this is, you may say that sociology is in a way brought into the fabric of the human existence as part of that who you are as a human, your necessity to understand who you are in terms of social structure, where you stand in it, which social class you represent, and to be critical about it, that is to think about how you can improve it, how you can change your position, the society in general, etc. So that's what defines agency. Now, structure is that relatively stable and enduring element or elements in social life, because structure usually consists of many, many things, many institutions. And here you see the book where it all comes from. It's 1984. Giddens published The Constitution of Society with the subtitle Outline of the Theory of Structuration. And those structures are expressed by the rules, which are normative elements in social life, encompassing the shared understandings, norms, and conventions that guide social interaction. Rules are continually interpreted and reinterpreted by the social actors. So rules, important to understand. Giddens talks about so-called weak social structures, weak in the sense that not that they're unstable, but that they're not rigid, they're not so strong that they're difficult to change. They're actually quite easily changed by the human interaction. So, for instance, the rules of public behavior, which is called social etiquette, are flexible guidelines that can vary depending on the context and the across the actors involved. So etiquette, understanding etiquette, rules of behavior, is always a matter of slightly interpreting what goes on and how do I apply those rules. Not just applying them as a certain set of predefined ideas, but as rules that need to be adapted to the actual situation. And that's why they're not so rigid structures. That's why they're so-called weak structures. Sometimes those structures can be much stronger, difficult to overcome, very rigid, totalitarian even. So agency implies the power. And power means ability to exercise certain control over resources. Now, power is transformative capacity of the agents to make that difference in the social world. And you can have two types of power. One is the power over subject-subject relations. That is, you're the subject and the other person is the subject. So between you, there's a subject-subject relationship. And that is called authority. But if that's a subject and a material object that doesn't have a consciousness, that can't make its own decisions, isn't a free agent, then it's a capacity for allocation of the goods. That means power of sharing and distribution of a certain amount of goods. Now, on the side, you see the Giddens theory of structuration, a critical appreciation, a set of articles edited by Christopher Bryant and David Jerry. And they, of course, are celebrating this theory and trying to see how it stands up against the test of time. Now, the resources we're talking about are the various types of capital that individuals draw upon to achieve their goals. These resources are the means to exert influence and achieve desired outcomes. And you have two types of resources. You have authoritative resources, which relate to power and control. That is, control of other human beings. And those are symbolic resources, such as knowledge, status, and social connections. And all of them play a critical role in the exercise of power within the society, because the higher your status, the more power you have, the more knowledge you have, the more power you have. And this is expert type of knowledge that is possessed by experts and expertise. And medical doctors are one of those experts, which actually have quite a lot of power. But then there's power of social connections, social networking, support of that. Also, there's allocative resources, control over material objects or economic capital. Well, this is pretty straightforward. It is money and other resources that we may allocate to certain places in society, and state budgets are basically one big deal of allocating the state budgets to all state-maintained functions and fields, including the medical care and the healthcare system. Now, Giddens distinguishes structures in relation to their origin. He talks about dominant structures, which results from control over allocative and authoritative resources. Then he talks about signification, structure resulting from symbols that encode meanings, so to shape perceptions. And we're in the process of building the signification resources, because education is about that. And then finally, legitimation, structure resulting from the norms that govern social action. And this comes from Latin word legius, which is law. So it is something to talk about jurisdiction, while signification comes from sign, that is language and symbolics, power, and so on and so on. And finally, structuration is a situation where you have interplay between the rules and resources. So individuals use rules to guide their actions and draw upon the resources to implement them. And in doing so, they also may modify the rules or reallocate the resources. The situation and the outcome is always different. So individuals use rules to guide as guides of their actions, but they also modify the rules and therefore modify the situation. And the process is the constant dynamic. The social structures are continually shaped and reshaped through the human agency, but human agency and human constitution is also reshaped by the society. So there's a mutual influence of both upon each other. And we end the lecture with Richard Kilminster's book. And the title of it, again, I like the books and I like the paradoxes and provocation that sociology offers. And he writes about the sociological revolution. And that revolution took place in 18th century, which is the Enlightenment era, where the sociology was born because they started to take measurements as they started to figure out. And sociology did split from philosophy, which it was part of. So you can see here the constant still this interplay between philosophy, because, remember, Žižek, he is not a sociologist per se. He is a philosopher that does a sociological reflection. It makes up a sociological argument. So now we see that you can also use philosophy as a means to argue your sociological position, but you need to use sociological methods of exploring reality, gathering empirical data in order to support your theories and your speculations. And that I hope we will achieve in seminars. Thank you very much for your attention.